Welcome back, and I have done a flipbook of all three layers merged together. So let's have a quick recap what I have. So in the last video we started to experiment with how we're going to warp the portal into the room. So I did do that and I played around a bit more, but I didn't actually change anything. So I've still got that bulge. So that's just pushing it down slightly into the room. Then I've got this magnet, which is kind of, for me, it's going to help all the other effects sit nicely into that funnel. Those rings, those vertical rings I have. And then we're using the attribute transfer with some keyframes on these two values to actually bring the portal out from a single position. And if I look at these ramps, you can see I've just gone for a slow, 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 and then a pop towards the end. So it should be a, let's see if we can have a look. Well, actually I have the flipbook, so we'll look at that now. And that's it. And I've put that in a subnet and duplicated it for each one of these sims, I think, and this moves it up into the correct location. So I think what we'll do is we'll actually start to do some renders and apply a basic shader to it and tweak some p-scale and some color settings, and then we'll render it out, and soon we'll start to composite. And I think this is a good place to set up some layers for comp. And then what I usually do is I'll start a comp and then think, ooh, I could use an extra sort of background layer, or I could use a layer that does highlights. And obviously there's a few layers that I also haven't spoken about yet that we've seen in some reference. So I was talking about, let's go back to portal effects. That blink portal had some bits in it that felt quite flaky. So I thought we could add some ember, sort of ember type, ember or ashy type stuff. So let's just look at this one more time. So it's not actually flakes. In this case, it looks like it's just a noise pattern that's moving through. But once again, we're not recreating this one. So the impression I got from this was sort of flakes or embers flying out from the hot edge. So we still need to add those kind of layers, but I think we're in a good enough space to start test rendering. So let me show you the flipbook. This is with all three layers currently merged together. So I'm still not 100% happy with this ramp, but I figured after a while of playing with it, I think to make it any more of a sort of anticipation, I'd need to make a custom effect. So I think I've gotten as much as I can out of this base simulation, and yeah, to get any more out of this, I'll probably just do a custom sim. But you can see the three layers sit quite well together, and I think it really helps this kind of this magnet warp I've done, because the sim feels like it's kind of flying out of that tunnel. So I'm happy with that. Let's set up a mantra and do some renders. Just going to clear the cache here. Okay, so for starters, let's just look at one of these pop down a mantra. Right, and then we want this to be the frame range. We want this to be cam. We'll go for full resolution. Now what we do need to do is also test the environment render, but we'll do that after we set up some basic portal attributes. We want motion blur. At the moment, we're probably going to render points. As a sort of default, we usually end up taking the point sims and rasterizing them into a volume. In this case, I'm hoping to get away because of the distance from the camera, and it's sort of a case-by-case thing. If it's a wide enough shot and you have enough points, then you don't really need to rasterize. But sometimes you do want it to feel a bit more smoky, or sometimes it actually helps you because it will fill in a lot of the gaps here with that volume. So we'll see where that gets us. I'm going to switch off ray variance, just because for simple stuff like this, I think it's a bit quicker. For the environment, we might need to have it on. And that's all fine. I'll switch off stochastic as well, because at the moment I'm finding stochastic to just make noise, where if you switch it off, it doesn't actually take longer to render, and it's noise free. And I'll probably just switch off all of these. We don't need any bounces. We're just going to render a completely emissive point cloud. Right, that's it. We can set up the images afterwards. Let's just get a render going. I do need, well, let's leave it for now and see what we get. Okay, so that actually took a very long time, 14 minutes, and as you can see, absolutely nothing interesting to see here. So we've got giant spheres, everything is dark. So for starters, I'm just going to remove everything from the render and just add the portal. And then another thing we need to do is actually set up the LUT. So if I come down here, right click, load LUT, and what we have is I've got the open color IO, so OCIO LUTs, and that includes LUTs for Houdini. If you search for OCIO LUTs, you'll find I think it's a GitHub link, and it's basically open source, so you can download these straight to your machine. And then I'm just using the sRGB to ACES CG, and it doesn't really matter, but as long as you end up using the same one in comp. So once we're in Fusion, I'll point it to the Fusion equivalent of sRGB to ACES CG, just so that we're not working in linear. So we can compare that now, but as you can see, this is still extremely slow. So don't crash. Let me pause this. I think it's just because our points are way too big. So I'll put down a wrangle, and we'll set our P scale to a channel here. And I'll set it to something really low. So let's try this again. Now it is going to be dark because we don't have an emissive shader on, so this is being lit by the environment and the spotlight I have. So that's looking a bit better and it's rendering quicker. And just to compare, let's just test the array variance. So this took about 37 seconds with ray variance on. I'm guessing it's a bit slower, but what I will do is take all of these quality settings down. We don't need diffuse, we don't need SSS, we don't need reflection, refraction, volume. So there's no shader on this at the moment, so it's probably gonna disappear. Oh, you can still see it. Let's try stochastic on. So I'm not seeing a huge speed difference here. If anything, ray variance does seem to be a bit slower. So let's leave that off for now. I think this does seem a bit quicker. So that's what we have for now. And then you can see what the LUT is doing here. So just make sure you're always viewing it with the LUT on. Now at work, I'm actually still using shop networks and surface shader builders, so I might end up diving back into that kind of setup depending on if I find it difficult to figure out how the AOVs work and stuff like that. But for now I'm just gonna try and adapt and put down a principled shader. This should be very basic. I mean, all we need is the point, color, and the alpha. So we do have a color and an alpha attribute on these particle sims. So if I just bring those in, plug them into the principled shader, that should be pretty much everything we need. So I've got color, get alpha as well. Float. So let's have a look. I want to plug color into emission color, and then I'll use the length of that and I'll plug that into the emission intensity. And then in the alpha, I'll just plug straight into opacity. And then we'll see what we get. If I can find it. Need to apply the material here. So it's immediately throwing up an error surface exports, and I don't know why. Looks like it's still rendering though. So there we go. That looks like it's done what we need it to do. Now, one other thing, and I'm not going to do it now because I actually want the control in comp. But you can see by making it completely emissive, I've actually added some noise in the form of bright points. So some of these particles are quite sparse, and now they're completely emissive, so I get to see stuff that I don't necessarily want to see. And if you look at the alpha, those points should be pretty invisible. So most times, if I'm building a basic emissive shader, which basically is every kind of magic shader, I'll actually multiply the color by the alpha. So this just basically recreates what you would do in comp, which does exactly this. It multiplies that color by the alpha. In this case, I just want as much information as I can in the render, so I'll just multiply it if I need to when we're in compositing. So that's good enough for now. And one thing I do want to check is whether motion blur is going to add something for us. So let me double check. I do have a velocity attribute. I do. Come into sampling, add velocity blur, and then I'll re-enable motion blur here. So I'll quickly check this, but basically we can use the same shader for every one of our portal layers, and then just change the p-scale and maybe boost the colors just with a wrangle for each one. So it looks like the motion blur is pretty subtle. So I'll usually do a base render like this, and then for magic I'll go and tweak velocity values. So I might put down a sort of velocity multiplier, multiply the velocity up by 10 or even 20 sometimes, just to sort of fake it. It doesn't always need to be 100% realistic in terms of the shutter speed and the offset. That all seems to be working fine. So I'll also check by adjusting the colors here in the render viewport, just to make sure I've got enough range. So this can go pretty low, and I can see some of the smaller details. And obviously by default it's actually quite bright. So that's fine. What I'll do is I'll just add this to each one of these quickly, and then let's do a quick render. I'll half the resolution just to see how they all look together. Once we're happy with this, I think I'll end this video, and in the next one we'll just do some test renders of the environment, so that by the end of that one we can render pretty much the whole environment and all the particles and everything, and we can catch up in Fusion with a first pass of the comp. So what am I getting here? That's interesting. What I think that is motion blur. So I think what's happening is one of these layers has a huge velocity, and I'm guessing it's either one of my warping ideas with the magnet that's kind of causing a huge velocity down like this, or it's my actual tunnel sim. So we definitely need to fix that. Let's see if I can quickly identify which one it is. That one's fine. And it is the tunnel one. Let me try and just recalculate velocity on this one. It's always a bit dangerous putting nodes down while the render's going. Well, I thought it fixed it for a second there, but it doesn't look like it has. Yeah, just a few points are getting a super high velocity. Let me have a look now. Let me pause this. Take a look at the actual values here. Okay. I do have velocity, but I'm not seeing it. Oh, there it is. Wow. And now I'm really testing this laptop. Okay, let's not click that again. So I'll do my old remove most of the points, take another look and see if I can identify what's causing those huge spikes. Right. So I guess the scale in the duplicate is scaling the velocity up by 3 every time it duplicates. So even though I'm squashing the minus y points back to 0, I'm not squashing the velocity. So I just wonder now if those points up and down are going to cause an issue as well. what I will do for now is I'm just going to remove velocity until I think of maybe another way around that. Oh boy. There we go. Back to normal. So that's all the layers together. And then just as an example, I don't want to experiment for too long, but I could have, so I'll name these, and I could have one that's for alpha and one that's for color, or just put it both attributes in one, doesn't really matter. And I'll say CD times equals, just view this, and this time I'll put a ramp based on the color attribute itself. So basically what I want to do is just exaggerate the difference in the color. So just to explain a bit more, I have varying colors of sort of blue and white, and then dark blue, and I just want to make those differences more extreme. So maybe I want the whites to be much brighter, and for each one, so similar to what we did up at the top, if you remember, I had just one sim here that I split into 3 networks, and I multiplied the middle one up. So I want enough control to change our 3 final sims here so that some of them are brighter than others. So CD times equals channel ramp based on CDX, or let's just go with Z, so based on blue. And then I can show you what that looks like. So I could basically have something like this for one of them, and I could take that part of the ramp and just make it go all the way to 2. And then I should still have the full bottom range to work with in the comp, but I've got a super bright spot as well. So if any of these sims look like there's some small bright details that need to be brought out more, I might just play with the ramps for each one while looking at all of them together. Just get something a bit different between them. So I think that's enough for now. Basically, that's all we need really to render these points, and we have the shader. So I'll clean that up, and we'll come back in the next one and do a render of the environment, and then just render as much of that as we can. So I'll see you then.